Have you ever wondered whether the way you touch yourself now, in your 60s or beyond, may no longer be what your body truly needs? It's a question men rarely speak aloud, yet it lingers in the quiet hours of the night, tucked away behind decades of silence. For some, it surfaces in a moment of frustration when the body no longer responds as it once did. For others, it comes wrapped in guilt, the faint echo of old voices declaring what is proper and what should have been left behind in youth. And here's the truth, this is one of the most common, yet least talked about, questions among older men. Not just whether masturbation is acceptable at their age, but whether it is still safe, still healthy, still worth embracing. For centuries, across cultures, men were told in hushed tones that desire should fade with age, that passion belonged to the young, and that restraint was a kind of virtue. But medicine and life itself tell us another story. The way you take care of yourself in your 60s, 70s, and beyond cannot mirror what you did in your 20s. The body is not a static machine. It changes quietly but profoundly. Skin thins, nerve endings respond differently. Blood vessels, once strong and forgiving, grow more delicate. Even the rhythms of the heart and breath shift. All of these changes mean that the way you approach self-pleasure must evolve too. To cling to the old methods is like trying to read by candlelight when the world has given you a brighter lamp. It works, perhaps, but strains you more than it should. In today's journey, we will walk through 3 of the most common mistakes men over 60 make when it comes to self-pleasure, and how to avoid them. But more importantly, we will explore how this practice, so often dismissed or hidden, can become something nourishing, protective, and deeply dignified for both body and mind. Because here lies the deeper question. What if the very act you've been taught to dismiss, to hide or to rush through, is in fact a key to your health, your confidence, and your longevity? What if it is not indulgence, but medicine? Before we step into these answers, allow me to make a request. If you value honest conversations about men's health, if you wish for a space where silence is replaced by truth, I invite you to support this community like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more. Each small act of engagement creates a ripple, a signal to other men, often watching in secrecy, that they are not alone. And so, before we examine the mistakes, we must first confront a myth, one that has shaped generations of men and carved itself into our culture. The belief that masturbation is something one must grow out of, an adolescent habit, unfit for the later chapters of life. This belief is not only false, it is harmful. For behind it lies the weight of unnecessary shame, the quiet erosion of health, and the silencing of men who deserve better. What you are about to hear may not only change how you think about your body, but how you inhabit it. It may ask you to see yourself not as someone reaching the end of vitality, but as someone standing at the threshold of a different, quieter strength, one that can last decades more. The conversation begins now. For many men, the hesitation around self-pleasure in later life does not come from the body at all, it comes from the mind. A powerful myth lingers in the background, whispering, "This is something you should have left behind with your youth." It is a myth stitched together from religion, culture, and generations of silence. In many societies, male sexuality was framed as a fiery force, acceptable in the vigor of youth, but expected to cool and fade with the years. In 19th century Europe, medical textbooks warned that masturbation drained vitality, even shortened life. In Victorian households, boys were told that touching themselves would lead to weakness, blindness, or madness. Across Asia, teachings often spoke of conserving vital essence, the seed of life, as though pleasure itself could empty a man of his strength. These warnings carried forward, echoing in modern times. By the mid-20th century, entire generations of men were raised with the belief that masturbation was shameful, even sinful. And though medicine has long disproven these fears, the shame remains. It is subtle but powerful, an inner voice that tells an older man that his desires are embarrassing, his habits childish, his body somehow betraying him for still wanting. But here is the truth that science and life experience lay bare. Masturbation is not only natural, it is profoundly healthy. It does not weaken a man, it strengthens him. It does not shorten life, it can extend it, protecting circulation, preserving prostate health, and even lifting mood and sleep. The great irony is that what was once seen as a vice may, in fact, be a form of care. And yet, myths are not easy to shed. They take root in memory. Perhaps you can remember being a teenager, discovering desire and feeling that rush of fear. What if someone finds out? What if this is wrong? Decades later, that fear still lives in the muscles, in the way some men rush through the act, or avoid it altogether, convinced they are too old for such things. But pause for a moment and ask, why would nature design a body that still responds to touch, still produces pleasure, still hungers for connection, well into the 8th or 9th decade of life, if not for a reason? Human beings were never meant to shut down desire at 40 or 50. The evidence of history tells us otherwise. Ancient Greek physicians like Hippocrates spoke of balance and the importance of release for bodily harmony. In Chinese medicine, moderation, not abstinence, was key to vitality. And even in cultures where religion encouraged restraint, records still show that older men quietly continued these practices, even if they could never speak of them. The shame that silences men today is not truth, it is inheritance. Inherited fears, inherited prohibitions, inherited misunderstandings. And like any inheritance, you are free to set it down. Because here is the hidden cost of believing the myth. Men who bury this part of themselves often pay with loneliness, with tension, and even with declining health. They lose the simple intimacy of knowing their body still belongs to them. The invitation, then, is to see this not as something you should have grown out of, but as something that has grown with you. Pleasure in your 60s or 70s is not the same as it was at 20, and that is not a weakness. It is a transformation. What once was urgent becomes slower. What once was raw becomes tender. What once was secret can, if you allow it, become a quiet form of self-respect. The myth says, stop. The truth says, continue. And if you are willing to step past the myth, the question then becomes, why does it matter so much for your health? The answer lies in the body itself: circulation, hormones, nerves, all of which respond in surprising ways to this simple, often misunderstood act. That is where our journey takes us next. The question is often whispered in private. Why bother at this age? The unspoken assumption is that pleasure belongs to the young, that older men should quietly step aside, as if their bodies no longer have a place in desire. But the body tells a different story, one written not in shame, but in biology, medicine, and even in history itself. Self-pleasure after 60 is not indulgence. It is not immaturity. It is maintenance, restoration, and yes, medicine. Doctors know this, though it is rarely spoken aloud. Each time blood flows to the penis, it nourishes the delicate erectile tissue, keeping it oxygenated and resilient. Without this regular flow, the tissue begins to stiffen, lose elasticity, and weaken. It is much like a muscle that goes unused, atrophy sets in. Gentle self-stimulation ensures that circulation is not lost, that function is not surrendered to time. Beyond this, it supports prostate health, one of the most vital concerns for men as they age. Ejaculation clears fluid from the prostate gland, reducing congestion that might otherwise contribute to inflammation or discomfort. It is a small, natural act that carries with it protective power. The benefits reach further still. When you touch yourself, when you allow your body to move into arousal and release, stress hormones like cortisol decline. In their place rise endorphins and dopamine, the brain's quiet gifts of calm and contentment. This shift lowers blood pressure, supports the heart, and even enhances sleep. For men who wake restless in the night, burdened with racing thoughts, this simple ritual can restore balance where pills so often fail. And here is something few consider. The nervous system itself depends on touch to stay alive to sensation. Nerves that are never engaged grow less responsive over time. Like paths through a forest, unused ones fade into undergrowth, while those walked upon remain clear. Self-pleasure keeps those pathways alive, reminding the body how to feel, how to respond, how to remain connected. It is remarkable to think that what was once treated as a guilty secret may, in fact, be one of the keys to longevity. Anthropologists note that in ancient Taoist traditions, older men were encouraged not to abandon sexuality, but to cultivate it carefully, gently, as a source of vitality. In India, tantric teachings spoke of energy flowing through the body, renewed through mindful touch. Even the Stoics of Rome, though outwardly stern, quietly acknowledged that bodily functions, when balanced, were necessary for health. Across cultures, the body was never meant to close its doors to pleasure with age. Yet, perhaps the most overlooked reason why self-pleasure matters is the simplest one. It affirms that you are still alive. To touch yourself, to feel desire stir, to allow release, these are reminders that your body still belongs to you, that it is not merely an aging vessel, but a living, breathing, responsive part of who you are. In a world that too often tells older men to fade into silence, this is an act of quiet defiance. It says, I am still here, I am still whole, I still deserve to feel. And so, when we ask why self-pleasure matters after 60, the answer is layered. It matters because it protects circulation. It matters because it supports the prostate. It matters because it calms the heart, restores the nerves, and lifts the spirit. But most of all, it matters because it preserves dignity, the right to remain fully human, body and soul, no matter one's age. But of course, there is a challenge hidden here. The body at 60 is not the body at 20. It no longer responds the same way, no longer forgives the same roughness or impatience. This means the act must change. It must evolve with the man himself. To cling to the old ways is to risk harm. To adapt is to discover something new, something deeper. That is where we turn next, how the body transforms with age, and why learning to listen to it anew is the first step in reclaiming strength, pleasure, and confidence. It is easy to forget that the body is not a fixed thing, but a story constantly being rewritten. In youth, that story is fast and forgiving. Wounds heal quickly, sensations spark brightly, and the body answers almost every demand without hesitation. But with time, the writing slows. The lines deepen. The body does not betray you, it simply speaks a different language. By the time a man reaches his 60s or 70s, his skin has thinned. What was once firm and resilient becomes delicate, more vulnerable to friction and abrasion. The nerves beneath it too begin to change. They respond more slowly, require more coaxing, more patience. Where once a touch was enough, now it may take a lingering hand, a softened pace. Circulation also tells its own story. The vessels that once expanded eagerly to bring blood where it was needed may now stiffen, resisting that flow. Years of wear of stress, of diet, of habits both good and bad leave their mark. Erections may take longer, may arrive with less force. This is not failure. It is biology. The body, like an instrument, requires gentler tuning, not harsher pressure. Hormones, too, shift their balance. Testosterone, once abundant, begins its slow decline. Energy changes, mood fluctuates, desire itself may rise and fall in ways that surprise or frustrate. These changes can make a man question himself, his worth, his masculinity, but in truth they are universal. They do not erase manhood, they redefine it. To understand these changes is not to surrender to them, but to adapt. Consider the craftsman who has used the same tools all his life. As he ages, his hands lose some strength, his eyes dim slightly, but he does not abandon his craft. He learns to work differently, more deliberately, more mindfully, with greater respect for each motion. The work in some ways becomes more artful. So it is with the body. Cultures across the world have long honored this stage of life. In Japan, aging is not seen as decline, but as the emergence of wabi-sabi, a beauty born from imperfection and time. In ancient China, Taoist masters described the older body as a reservoir of wisdom, requiring gentler flows of energy, not the torrents of youth. And even in Western philosophy, the Stoics saw age not as the end of strength, but as the beginning of understanding, the time when one learns what truly matters. Seen in this light, the changes of age are not enemies, they are invitations. An invitation to slow down. An invitation to notice more. An invitation to find depth where once there was only urgency. Yet, here lies the danger. Many men ignore these changes. They continue to treat their bodies as though nothing has shifted, gripping too tightly, rushing too quickly, demanding what the body can no longer give in the same way. And in doing so, they create harm, small injuries, frustration, even emotional wounds that cut deeper than the physical ones. But what if, instead of resisting change, you listen to it? What if you treated your body not as a machine that must perform, but as a companion that has walked decades with you, deserving care, patience, and dignity? This is the turning point. To move forward, we must recognize that the habits of youth cannot simply be carried into age. They must be transformed. And so we arrive at the heart of this journey, the 3 mistakes older men make most often when it comes to self-pleasure, and how to turn each one into an opportunity for renewal. Every journey into age comes with choices. Some are conscious, others made without realizing. And when it comes to intimacy with oneself, many men fall into the same silent traps. They are not born of weakness or ignorance, but of habits carried over from youth, never questioned, never adjusted. Think about it. Most men first learn about their own bodies in adolescence, when the blood runs faster, when arousal is immediate, when urgency feels impossible to resist. Back then, speed was everything. Release was the goal. The body responded instantly, and there was little thought for long-term effects. But what happens when a man continues those same patterns into his 50s, 60s, 70s? What was once effortless can become damaging. What once felt natural may now create strain, even pain. And yet, so many persist unaware that they are sabotaging themselves, mistaking decline for fate when in truth it is the result of misaligned practice. There are 3 mistakes in particular that almost every older man makes. They are quiet mistakes done in private, never spoken about, rarely even admitted. Yet their consequences ripple outward, shaping not only physical performance but also confidence, relationships, and a man's sense of self. The first mistake is about pressure, the way many men unknowingly train their bodies into resistance, rather than responsiveness. The second mistake is about speed, a rushing that once brought pleasure but now robs the body of sensitivity and endurance. And the third mistake is about expectation clinging to the standards of youth, demanding from the body what it can no longer give in the same way, and in doing so, shutting the door on a deeper kind of satisfaction. These mistakes are not small. They are the reason why many men feel frustrated with themselves, why they believe age has stolen something that, in truth, could have been preserved. They are the silent thieves of vitality. But here lies the hope. Each mistake can be reversed. Not with pills, not with surgery, not with expensive treatments, but with awareness and practice. By unlearning what no longer serves you and relearning the rhythms of your changing body, you can recover a sense of strength and pleasure many believe is lost forever. So let us walk through them, one by one. Not with judgment, but with honesty. Because only by naming the mistakes can we begin to transform them. And it all begins with the trap of too much pressure. Imagine the palm of your hand. When you press it gently against a soft surface, you feel texture, warmth, detail. But if you press too hard, all sensation disappears. The nerves become overwhelmed. The subtlety is gone, replaced by dull force. This is what happens to many older men when they self-pleasure. Over years, even decades, they develop the habit of using too much pressure. Perhaps it began in youth when urgency drove every action. Perhaps it became a shortcut, a way to guarantee release quickly. But with time, this habit rewires the body. The brain becomes accustomed to that level of intensity. The nerves, constantly compressed, become less responsive. Sensitivity diminishes, not because age has stolen it, but because habit has numbed it. The man then responds by pressing harder, believing he needs more force to feel anything, unaware that he is only deepening the cycle of desensitization. The result? Erections that take longer to achieve. Climax that feels weaker. A creeping frustration that whispers, "Something is wrong with me." But the truth is different. Nothing is broken. The body is simply reacting to years of conditioning. Consider it like a musician who has played a violin with heavy hands for decades. The instrument may still produce sound, but the strings lose their resonance. The bow no longer draws out the music it once did. Only by softening the touch can the true richness return. Many men, however, resist this change. They fear that gentleness means weakness, that slowing down means surrender. But the opposite is true. By reducing pressure, by allowing the skin, the nerves, the blood vessels to respond naturally, a man can retrain his body to feel again. Sensitivity, once dulled, can awaken. This is not instant. It requires patience. At first, lighter touch may feel unsatisfying, even frustrating. But slowly the body remembers. Nerves recalibrate. Pleasure shifts from blunt force to layered sensation. And with that shift comes something many men have not experienced since youth. The ability to feel more with less. Across cultures, ancient wisdom always pointed to this truth. In Taoist practices, men were taught that force was the enemy of longevity, that gentleness was the path to sustaining vitality. In Indian traditions of Tantra, touch was revered not for its intensity, but for its subtlety, the slow build, the awakening of hidden currents of energy. These were not simply spiritual ideas. They were practical lessons in preserving sensitivity. The modern man often scoffs at such notions, searching instead for quick fixes in pills or procedures. But the body does not respond to shortcuts, it responds to care. To reclaim what has been dulled, the first step is to unlearn the habit of pressure. Ask yourself, when was the last time you allowed yourself to feel slowly, without rushing to the end? When was the last time you explored gentleness not as compromise, but as discovery? If you can answer honestly, you may already sense the way forward. For those who cannot, know this: sensitivity is not lost forever. It waits beneath the surface, like embers under ash, needing only a softer touch to glow again. And so, with the first mistake revealed, we turn to the second, an error tied not to pressure, but to pace. Because just as force can dull the body, so can speed. And this too is a trap most men never realize they are in until it is too late. Speed has always been a temptation. In youth, it feels natural desire rises quickly, urgency takes over, and the body answers without hesitation. Release becomes the only destination, and the faster it comes, the more satisfying it seems. For a teenager or a young man, this is harmless. The body recovers instantly, the nerves remain sharp. The system is built for repetition. But as the years pass, that same urgency becomes a trap. The body no longer responds with such immediacy. Blood flow takes longer to gather, hormones rise more slowly. Nerves demand time to awaken. Yet many men, out of habit, still move at the pace of their youth, rushing, gripping, demanding a climax that the body is not yet ready to give. What happens then? Frustration. Erections falter midway. Release arrives too soon, or not at all. And the man, unaware of the deeper cause, begins to believe he has lost his strength, that something vital has slipped away forever. In truth, it is not weakness, it is misalignment. He is simply asking the body to sprint when it is built now for a marathon. Think of it like cooking. A fast flame can boil water, but it cannot coax deep flavors from a stew. For that, you need time-slow simmering, gentle heat, patience. The body in later years is much the same. It requires a slower rhythm, an acceptance that pleasure is no longer about racing to the finish line, but savoring every step of the path. Across many traditions, slowness has always been celebrated as the gateway to depth. Tantric practice teaches that slowing down expands sensation, turning minutes into hours of pleasure. Taoist philosophy speaks of quiet fire, an arousal nurtured slowly, steadily, so that energy does not flare and burn out, but endures like a steady flame. The irony is that most men never give themselves this gift. Conditioned by years of quick, rushed encounters, often hidden, often secret, they equate slowness with failure. They fear boredom, or worse, that they will not reach climax at all. And so they speed up, chasing what slips further away with every hurried movement. But slowness is not failure. It is mastery. To slow down is to reclaim control, to invite the body back into balance. When speed is replaced with rhythm, the nerves awaken more fully. Blood flow strengthens, not weakens. Pleasure becomes layered, not flat. And climax, when it comes, is not weaker but deeper, arriving not as a rushed necessity, but as a culmination of patience. Ask yourself, when was the last time you let time itself be part of the experience? When was the last time you breathed slowly, touched slowly, allowed arousal to rise like a tide instead of striking like a storm? This is the secret many men discover too late, that the very thing they resist, slowness, is the key to reviving not only their performance, but their joy. And yet there is one more mistake, perhaps the most subtle and the most damaging of all. It is not about the hand or the speed or even the nerves. It is about the mind, the expectations a man carries with him, and how those expectations can quietly destroy everything he still has. If the body slows with age, the mind often does not. The imagination, the memory, the expectation of what once was, they remain as vivid as ever. A man of 60 still remembers how it felt to be 20. How quickly desire rose, how easily the body obeyed, how inevitable the climax seemed. And in those memories lies the cruelest trap of all, the expectation that the present should mirror the past. Expectation is heavy. It sits on the shoulders during every encounter. Will I be able to perform the way I used to? What if I take too long? What if nothing happens at all? These thoughts swirl before the first touch even begins. And the body, sensitive to the mind's every command, tightens under the weight of that pressure. Muscles contract, breathing shortens, blood flow falters. What could have been a moment of connection turns into a quiet battlefield between fear and desire. This is why so many men mistake their struggles for failure of the body, when in truth, it is the mind that is at war with itself. The shame of needing more time, the guilt of wanting pleasure in old age, the frustration of not living up to a ghost from decades ago. Across history, cultures have wrestled with this same burden. In Victorian England, men were warned that desire in old age was unseemly, even dangerous to health. In certain religious traditions, self-pleasure was labeled as sinful, instilling guilt that carried into every intimate act. Even in modern society, men are taught that masculinity is measured by speed, hardness, and frequency, as if tenderness, patience, or slowness were somehow signs of weakness. But here's the truth: expectation is an illusion. The body at 70 does not need to imitate the body at 20. Its value does not lie in repetition, but in reinvention. A slower touch is not a failure, it is a new form of intimacy. A climax that arrives after patience is not less powerful, it is richer, like a wine aged over time. Releasing expectation is like unlocking a prison door. The tension softens. The mind shifts from judgment to curiosity. Suddenly, the body is free to explore again, not as a soldier marching to a familiar drill, but as an artist discovering new textures, rhythms, sensations. The emotional side cannot be ignored. Neuroscience shows us that pleasure is not only physical but deeply psychological. Dopamine, the brain's messenger of joy, rises when curiosity replaces fear, when exploration replaces pressure. The nervous system itself responds differently under kindness than under judgment. So the greatest mistake is not rushing nor gripping too tightly, it is carrying the weight of yesterday into today. When men cling to who they were, they miss the invitation of who they could still become. And this is where everything changes. Because once a man frees himself from the chains of expectation, he can begin to approach intimacy, both with himself and with others, not as a test to pass, but as an experience to savor. But freedom, of course, must be practiced. And so the question becomes, how does one begin? How does a man relearn the language of his own body after decades of silence, shame, or speed? That is where the path of renewal begins. To renew does not mean to return. It means to begin again, carrying wisdom instead of nostalgia. For men entering their 60s, 70s, and beyond, the body is not broken, it is simply rewritten. What once came easily now asks for attention. What once rushed forward now requires patience. But hidden within this slowing is a profound invitation to learn the body's language anew. Learning begins with humility, to touch oneself not as a master commanding, but as a student listening. The hands no longer demand, they inquire. How does the skin respond to lightness? To warmth? To rhythm? Which areas awaken slowly? Which surprise with sudden sparks? These questions are not distractions. They are the foundation of rediscovery. Science supports this gentle curiosity. Studies in neuroplasticity reveal that the nervous system is not fixed, it adapts, even late in life. When touched in new ways, nerve pathways strengthen. Sensitivity, long thought to be lost, can be coaxed back. Blood vessels, when encouraged through deep breathing and relaxed arousal, grow more resilient. Even hormones shift, responding to calm and pleasure with healthier balance. And so the practice becomes less about climax and more about exploration. A man who once judged himself by speed now measures progress by depth. 5 minutes of mindful breathing, of slowing the hands, of simply noticing without rushing, this alone can reshape the experience. Over weeks, the body relearns safety, pleasure, and responsiveness. Cultures across time have understood renewal as a sacred act. In Taoist texts, older men were guided to preserve energy not through denial but through cultivation, turning intimacy into meditation, transforming arousal into vitality. In Indian tantric traditions, self-pleasure was seen not as sin but as a bridge between body and spirit, where slowness and awareness revealed dimensions of ecstasy that urgency could never touch. Even modern therapists echo this truth. They call it sensate focus, a method where one lets go of performance and instead pays attention to pure sensation, step by step. No goal, no deadline, just presence. The surprising result? Desire grows naturally, like a fire fed by steady oxygen instead of a sudden match. For men who fear they have lost their spark, this path offers not repair but rebirth. It says, your body is not betraying you. It is inviting you into a new chapter. A chapter where intimacy is not measured by hardness or speed, but by softness, curiosity, and presence. The first step is simple, though not easy. Permission. Permission to set aside shame. Permission to explore slowly. Permission to treat self-pleasure, not as something hidden or rushed, but as self-care, as vital as sleep or food. Because renewal is not a trick or a technique, it is a practice. and like all practices, it deepens with time. Yet renewal does not end with the self. For many men, the next challenge is bringing this newfound gentleness into connection with another person. How do you share what you've learned when culture has long demanded silence? That too is part of the journey. Renewal begins alone, but it does not have to end there. For many men, the quiet rediscovery of self leads naturally to a deeper question. How do I share this with someone I love? After years, perhaps decades, of habits built on silence or performance, reimagining intimacy with a partner can feel daunting. Yet it is precisely here, in connection, that renewal becomes transformation. For too long, intimacy has been defined by narrow measures: stamina, speed, performance. Men are taught that to be worthy is to be hard, fast, unshakable. Women too are shaped by cultural scripts that make them expect passion to be fiery and instant. Both sides, bound by expectation, miss the truth. Intimacy is not a performance. It is a conversation. And like any conversation, it thrives not on speed but on presence. Imagine a partner who is no longer rushing to the finish line, but instead listening, noticing, attuning to subtle responses. Imagine a man who has learned to savor, to breathe, to stay patient. In that space, intimacy ceases to be mechanical. It becomes alive again. History reminds us that such intimacy is not new, it is ancient. In medieval Japan, poets describe the art of iki, a form of refined sensuality rooted not in conquest, but in atmosphere, anticipation, and emotional resonance. In Mediterranean cultures, foreplay was once considered the true act of love, with climax seen only as one note in a longer symphony. Across time, societies have recognized that the most lasting connections are born not from urgency but from presence. Modern science echoes these old truths. Couples who slow down, who prioritize touch, breath, and communication, experience greater satisfaction well into old age. Oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone, rises not from speed but from sustained closeness. Heart rates synchronize. Nervous systems calm. Pleasure deepens for both, not because the body is young, but because the spirit is attentive. Yet many men hesitate to bring this new approach into their relationships. They fear ridicule. They fear their partner will notice what has changed and judge them for weakness. But here lies the paradox. The very thing they fear admitting, the slowing of the body, can become the greatest gift they offer. For a partner, slowness is not failure. It is devotion. It says, I am not here to perform, but to be with you. Not to prove, but to connect. When spoken through action, this message has the power to rebuild trust, even after years of distance. But to reimagine intimacy with another requires courage. Courage to speak openly. I need more time now. Courage to ask gently. What feels good for you? Courage to accept that aging does not close the door on passion, but simply opens it differently. When both partners step into this honesty, intimacy becomes lighter, freer, and paradoxically more youthful than ever. Because it is no longer about clinging to what once was, but about creating something entirely new. And yet the journey is not without obstacles. Old beliefs do not vanish overnight. Shame lingers. Doubt returns. But there are tools, rituals, and practices ancient and modern that can guide a man and his partner through this transformation. That is where the path leads next. The search for intimacy that endures is not new. Long before medicine carried the language of hormones and circulation, ancient cultures studied the same mysteries through observation, ritual, and philosophy. What is striking today is how often their wisdom aligns with what modern science now proves. In the Taoist traditions of China, texts written more than 2,000 years ago advised men to approach pleasure with patience and breath. They believed the body's energy qi could be nourished or depleted depending on how intimacy was practiced. Fast release was seen as wasteful. Slow cultivation as a source of vitality and longevity. They taught that arousal should be carried like a flame, sheltered by the hands, protected, nurtured, allowed to glow rather than burn out. In India, the tantric schools described something similar, that true ecstasy was not a peak to be rushed toward, but an ocean to drift in. Climax was considered only one wave in a vast sea of sensation. The art lay in slowing down enough to feel every current, every subtle ripple of energy moving through the body. Modern science, with its machines and microscopes, speaks in different terms but points to the same truths. Researchers now know that when intimacy is rushed, the body activates the sympathetic nervous system, the fight-or-flight state. Blood vessels constrict. Breathing becomes shallow. Erections weaken. But when intimacy is slowed, when breathing deepens and touch is gentle, the parasympathetic system takes over. Muscles relax, blood flow increases, and the body enters a state of safety where pleasure can fully bloom. Oxytocin, the hormone of trust and bonding, rises not from quick friction but from sustained closeness. Dopamine, the brain's messenger of anticipation and reward, lingers longer when arousal is stretched out, building layer upon layer of satisfaction. Even testosterone, long thought to simply decline with age, responds to consistent touch and intimacy, helping men maintain vitality well into their later years. What the ancients intuited, science now confirms. Slowness is not weakness, it is power. Gentleness is not fragility, it is medicine. An expectation, when released, makes room for something more enduring than performance. Connection. For men who doubt, who think this sounds poetic but not practical, the evidence is clear. Studies show that older adults who maintain regular, mindful intimacy report better sleep, stronger immunity, sharper memory, and even longer life. The body, it seems, rewards those who refuse to let shame or haste govern their pleasure. It is not about becoming young again, it is about becoming whole again. The ancients knew it. The scientists prove it. And every man, if he chooses, can live it. But knowing is not the same as doing. The question that remains is, how does one begin? How does a man take this wisdom from temples and laboratories alike and weave it into the fabric of daily life? The answer lies in simple rituals. Small acts that, practiced consistently, reshape not only the body but the mind. Renewal does not happen in one night. It is not a revelation that strikes like lightning, but a fire built slowly, log by log, until warmth fills the room. For men seeking to rediscover intimacy with themselves and others, the path forward begins with small, deliberate rituals, acts that may seem ordinary, yet over time transform the way body and mind respond. The first ritual is breath. Too often, men forget to breathe when they touch themselves. The chest locks tight, the lungs stay shallow, as if pleasure were a task to finish quickly. But slow, deep breathing changes everything. Each inhale draws oxygen into the blood, expanding vessels, awakening nerves. Each exhale releases tension, telling the body it is safe. Just 3 minutes of mindful breathing before beginning can shift the entire experience. The second ritual is setting. A quiet, uncluttered space where the mind can rest. In younger years, secrecy often meant haste, rushing, hiding, stealing moments without preparation. But in later years, creating an intentional environment matters. Clean sheets, a dim light, perhaps soft music or silence. When the space feels safe, the body follows. The third ritual is touch itself. Not rushing to the most obvious places, but exploring with curiosity, using lighter strokes. Varying rhythm. Introducing natural, fragrance-free lubricants to reduce friction and protect delicate skin. Think of it as learning an instrument again, not playing loudly, but carefully tuning each string, listening for resonance. The fourth ritual is time. Set aside at least 15 minutes, not as a rule, but as an offering. Intimacy, whether alone or shared, cannot bloom under a ticking clock. Give yourself permission to go slowly, to wander, to stop and breathe when needed. Over time, this practice retrains the nervous system to associate pleasure with calm rather than urgency. And finally, the fifth ritual is reflection. Afterward, pause. Do not rush to distraction or sleep. Instead, notice how the body feels. Notice the calm, the warmth, the subtle glow. This is not wasted time, it is integration. The moment when the body remembers and carries the lesson forward. Across cultures, rituals have always carried power. Ancient shamans lit fires before speaking to the spirits. Monks rang bells before beginning their chants. These acts did not summon magic. They prepared the mind to receive it. In the same way, these small rituals of renewal prepare the body to rediscover itself. Men who practice them find something unexpected. Not only does sensitivity return, but dignity does as well. They no longer feel like strangers to their own bodies. They feel aligned, patient, confident, alive. Yet rituals are only the beginning. For some men, true renewal also means courage. The courage to break silence, to speak openly with partners, doctors, even friends. To carry the private journey into the shared world. That is where the transformation deepens. Silence can be heavy. It sits on the chest like a stone, pressing down day after day. For many men, silence is the shield they've carried their whole lives, the belief that if they say nothing, no one will see their weakness, no one will judge, no one will know. But silence, though it hides the wound, also prevents the healing. Breaking that silence is not about confession. It is about connection. It begins quietly, perhaps with a doctor, someone trained to listen without judgment, to offer guidance instead of shame. A man might sit across from a physician, heart racing, and finally speak, "I can't feel the way I used to. I'm worried something is wrong." That single sentence can open doors to solutions, simple changes in diet, blood circulation, or even medical support that restores what was thought lost. But beyond doctors, breaking silence with a partner is even more profound. Many men fear that speaking of their struggle will disappoint their wives or lovers. They imagine rejection, pity, or distance. Yet again and again, stories reveal the opposite, that honesty builds closeness. A partner who hears, "I want to share this with you because I trust you," feels honored, not burdened. Together, they explore gentler ways of touching, slower rhythms, deeper intimacy that does not depend on perfection, but thrives on presence. Silence also breaks in circles of brotherhood. Not every man has such a space, but those who do support groups, trusted friends, even online communities often describe it as a revelation. To hear another man say, "Me too," is to realize you are not defective, not alone, not cursed. You are part of a larger story, one shared by millions who have been taught to hide what should be spoken. Of course, breaking silence takes courage. Centuries of culture have built walls around male vulnerability. Boys are told to be strong, not to cry, not to show weakness. By the time they become men, those lessons feel like chains. To speak openly is to break those chains, not just for oneself, but for the generations that follow. Imagine a father who chooses honesty with his adult son. "When I got older, I faced struggles with intimacy. I want you to know it's normal, and it can be healed." In that moment, silence does more than break. It dissolves. A cycle of shame ends, and a legacy of openness begins. Breaking silence is not about shouting from rooftops. It is about choosing one safe place, one trusted person, and daring to share the truth. With every word spoken, the stone on the chest grows lighter. And in that space, where shame once lived, hope takes root. Because when a man no longer carries his struggle alone, he discovers something powerful, that the very act of being seen, truly seen, is itself a form of healing. There comes a moment in every healing journey when the focus shifts. At first, it is about fixing what feels broken, restoring function, regaining strength, searching for proof that the body still remembers. But with time, men discover that the true treasure is not only physical, it is joy. Joy is different from pleasure. Pleasure is the spark, the shiver, the sensation that floods the skin. Joy is deeper, it lingers in the heart, coloring the way a man wakes in the morning, how he walks through the world, how he smiles without needing a reason. For years, some men live without joy, trapped in routine, numbed by shame, convinced that their best days are behind them. But once silence breaks, once rituals of renewal take root, something shifts. They laugh more easily. They feel lighter, not because every problem is solved, but because the weight of secrecy is gone. Reclaiming joy often begins with small things. A walk in the evening when the air is cool, a meal cooked slowly with love, a song hummed without thinking. These simple acts awaken the senses, reminding a man that life is not measured only in performance, but in presence. And as joy grows in daily life, it naturally returns to intimacy. Instead of pressure to prove himself, a man begins to savor the experience, the warmth of skin against skin, the safety of trust, the playfulness of touch. It is no longer about reaching an endpoint, but about enjoying the journey. In this space, intimacy becomes lighter, freer, and often more powerful than it ever was before. Partners notice this transformation. A wife might say, "You seem happier lately, more relaxed." A lover may notice how much more connected he feels, how his eyes shine brighter, how his laughter fills the room. Joy is contagious, it spreads, it uplifts, it renews not just the man himself, but everyone around him. And joy, once reclaimed, becomes a shield against despair. Difficult days will still come. Age will continue to move forward. But joy reminds a man that life is not defined by what has been lost, it is enriched by what can still be found. Perhaps the greatest realization is this: joy was never gone. It was only hidden beneath fear, shame, and silence. And when those layers are stripped away, what emerges is not a diminished man, but a whole one capable of loving, laughing, and living fully, even in the later chapters of life. Because reclaiming joy is not about turning back the clock. It is about stepping into the present with open arms, knowing that happiness is not behind you, it is right here, waiting to be embraced. Every man leaves behind a legacy. Some imagine it only in terms of wealth, property, or achievements. But the truest legacy is not written in bank accounts or carved into stone, it is carried in the hearts of those we love. And one of the most overlooked, yet most powerful legacies a man can leave is intimacy. Intimacy is not just physical. It is tenderness, honesty, presence. It is the ability to look into another's eyes without flinching, to hold a hand not only out of duty, but out of desire, to share silence without fear. When a man learns to reclaim intimacy in his later years, he teaches those around him something vital. That connection does not fade with age, that love does not expire, that closeness can deepen over time rather than diminish. Think of the ripple effect. A husband who speaks openly about his struggles with his wife teaches her that she is worthy of his truth. A father who models gentleness with his partner shows his children that masculinity is not about dominance, but about respect and care. A grandfather who laughs, dances, and holds his partner close, even in old age, whispers to his grandchildren, "This is possible." This is what love looks like when it grows old. This legacy matters because silence, shame, and repression are also legacies. They pass invisibly from one generation to the next. Boys watch their fathers hide pain, never speak, never reach out, and they learn to do the same. But when one man dares to break that cycle, he does more than heal himself, he shifts the future. Legacy is not measured in years lived, but in moments given. A tender kiss shared after decades of marriage. A word of encouragement spoken to a struggling son. A laugh that echoes across a dinner table, reminding everyone that joy belongs to every age. These are the things that endure, long after the body slows, long after names are carved in stone. Intimacy, when reclaimed, becomes a gift handed down. It is a message that says, you are never too old to love. You are never too broken to heal. You are never too far gone to return to yourself. And perhaps, that is the greatest legacy a man can leave. Not just the memory of who he was, but the living proof that love, in all its forms, can last until the very end. Because when intimacy becomes a legacy, it outlives the man himself. It becomes a light carried forward, guiding others to live openly, tenderly, and bravely. There comes a moment, at the end of every story, where silence feels almost as important as the words themselves. We have walked through the shadows of shame, unlearned the myths that bound us, and stepped into the light of a new understanding that intimacy, even in later years, is not only possible but profoundly necessary. If there is one truth to carry from all this, it is that age is not a closing door but an invitation. An invitation to move slower, yes, but also deeper, to savor rather than to rush, to replace fear with curiosity and duty with tenderness, to discover that what once felt like an ending is, in truth, a beginning of a different kind of journey, one rooted in patience, dignity, and compassion. The body changes, that is undeniable. Muscles weaken, skin softens, nerves grow quieter. But these changes are not betrayals. They are invitations to listen more closely, to honor the wisdom written into every wrinkle and scar. The same hands that once carried strength now carry gentleness. The same heart that once beat with urgency now beats with steadiness. And if we allow ourselves to lean into these changes instead of resisting them, we find not loss, but a fuller kind of wholeness. There is something profoundly human about the courage it takes to reclaim pleasure and intimacy later in life. It is not indulgence, but survival. It is not shameful, but sacred. To touch with kindness, to breathe without hurry, to find joy in a body that has carried you for decades, that is an act of reverence, an act of gratitude. And so, perhaps the greatest lesson is this: intimacy is not bound by age, only by our willingness to nurture it. Whether through self-discovery, a partner's embrace, or simply the quiet recognition that we are still alive, still capable of feeling, still worthy of joy, this is what makes us whole. So as this journey closes, let it not be an end, but a reminder. A reminder that your story is still unfolding. That your body, in all its changes, is not your enemy but your ally. That love inward and outward is always within reach, Carry this with you, not as instruction but as invitation. To breathe slower, to touch with intention, to see your reflection not with disappointment, but with compassion. And to know, with unshakable certainty, that you are still worthy of intimacy, of pleasure, of love. Because the truth is simple and eternal. You are not broken, you are becoming. And that journey never ends. Before we part ways, let me leave you with this thought. Somewhere tonight, perhaps in a quiet bedroom or a dimly lit living room, a man just like you is sitting with the same questions, the same doubts, the same unspoken fears. He wonders if what he feels is normal. He wonders if he is alone. And maybe, just maybe, the answer he needs could come from you. If this story resonated with you, if even one sentence felt like it was speaking directly into your chest, I invite you to act. Not later, not someday. Now. Try what you've learned tonight. Slow down. Breathe deeper. Approach your body with kindness. See what happens when you treat yourself not as a problem to be solved, but as a life to be honored. And then share. Because silence has weighed on men for far too long. Leave a comment below, even just a single line. Tell us where you're watching from, or share a thought, or a story, or even a question. Your words might be the spark that helps another man feel less alone. If you found comfort here, press that like button, not for me, but for the message, so it can travel further, so it can find the man who needs it most. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Each week we explore the truths that rarely get spoken aloud, the ones that can restore strength, confidence, and dignity no matter your age. And one more thing. Share this video with a friend, a brother, a father, anyone who might be carrying the same quiet weight. You never know what kind of change a simple act of generosity can bring. Because the truth is, healing is never meant to be walked alone. It is a journey we take together, in honesty, in courage, in compassion. And right here, in this growing circle of men across the world, you are not alone anymore. So go, try, breathe, share. This is your invitation. And I can't wait to see where it leads you. And so we reach the end. But endings, as you've now seen, are never really endings. They are pauses, reflections, doorways to something that waits just beyond. What began as a simple question, whether intimacy after 60 is still possible, has unfolded into something much larger. A story of the body, yes, but also of the spirit. It has been a journey through myths and truths, through mistakes and revelations. It has been a reminder that health is not just about survival, but about presence. That pleasure is not frivolous, but essential. That dignity is not lost with age, but reshaped into something quieter, deeper, stronger. Perhaps, as you close this chapter, you feel a shift. Small, but undeniable. A new awareness of your breath. A gentler way of seeing your body. A spark of courage to let go of shame and embrace what is rightfully yours: connection, tenderness, aliveness. That is the gift of this story. Not rules, not rigid answers, but an invitation. An invitation to choose compassion over judgment, curiosity over fear, patience over pressure. To see yourself not as a man past his prime, but as a man in his season, a season rich with its own wisdom, its own beauty, its own truth. Carry this with you. And when doubt returns, as it always does, remember that you are not broken, you are becoming. And that becoming never ends. The rest of the story is yours to write.